Hey, welcome back. We're going to start talking a little bit about composition, and I put a few things on the board. These are a variety of different aspect ratios that we will see in different types of cameras. Typically, the 35 millimeter film camera, which had one side of the film 36 millimeters, the other side about 23.3 millimeters, is an aspect ratio of 3 to 2, and 3 being this side, 2 being that side. It's the same aspect ratio that we see in 35 millimeter cameras. And these aspect ratios are dependent upon the type of CCD that we have in our camera. Of course, there are aspect ratios with some point and shoot cameras that are 4 to 3 aspect ratios, the same as our computer screen or our old TVs. Some cameras even have 16 to 9 aspect ratios, which is the same as our now widescreen HD TV, and also the same for a lot of our computer video work that we may be doing. And then a very special one is a 1-to-1 aspect ratio that only a few cameras may have, and certainly we can crop to 1-to-1 aspect ratios. Now, each of these, of course, has different purposes behind it. We definitely get with the 4 to 3 ratio, we can format this into an 8 by 10 very easily when we go to print. The 2 to 3, when printing, goes to an 8 by 12 inch, and that adds a little bit of problem if we're looking for 8 by 10 frames. Of course, the square format 1-to-1 aspect ratio is really interesting, and we will see that often used when we deal with symmetrical designs in any art form. But it can be fun for all kinds of things: portraiture, landscape work, interior, still life. And then the 16 by 9 aspect ratio almost starts to give us a panoramic composition. Now, if we have a camera, I have a little point and shoot that has all of these ratios on it. Sometimes there may be a 4 to 3 ratio screen in there, or CCD in there, and every time we choose a different aspect ratio, we're getting a lower resolution image. So it may be better to shoot in 4 to 3 ratio and then crop that. But it is fun going out and putting on the 1-to-1 aspect ratio and shooting with the square format. It is much different and often was very exclusive to very expensive Hasselblad owners who, back in the film days, had a little square format, as well as a few other twin lens reflex cameras. Now, of course, whenever we use any of these aspect ratios, how we arrange elements within these picture planes is what we call them in art. These areas like that canvas, the viewfinder that we look through. When we arrange objects in here, there are a lot of things to take into consideration. Some of those we have rules in which we can follow, like a thing called the rule of thirds, and that basically in photography, and let me grab my pen here, and we'll take the 4 to 3 aspect ratio. If we broke this into thirds vertically, into thirds horizontally, what we do is we set up a couple things. One, where the lines cross breaking up, these points here become very powerful points to place very significant objects within that picture plane. Also, it breaks it up into 3 long panels as well as, or 3 vertical panels as well as 3 horizontal panels that could relate to foreground, middle ground, and background. So if we were to take a photo of a landscape and we have some mountains in the foreground or landscape in the foreground and even bigger mountains in the background with our peak at this crossover, our moon rising overhead, significant object like a tree in that landscape, and we develop a foreground, middle ground, and background in our sky, and it helps to keep the picture moving in here. It doesn't take us off, keeps our attention, and objects place. Now, of course, if I was to look at this, I would certainly, if I had my options, I would probably put my tree on the other side here. And what I start to develop is a little bit of balance. There's movement in the picture between the foreground, middle ground, background, and also balance between these objects within the picture plane. And we'll talk a little bit more about this composition. Of course, the rule of thirds is made to be broken because rules are made to be broken. And many compositions, depending upon what we want to emphasize, if it's an abstracted image, if it's asymmetrical imbalance or symmetrical imbalance, the sunflower is a beautiful example of a very symmetrical design, and looking at that sunflower in the 1-to-1 aspect ratio, it breaks all the rules of the rules of third, but it attracts our attention to the center of the sunflower, the significant component in here. So a little bit about aspect ratios, depending upon CCD size and also the camera that you have, but some cameras give you choices when to shoot. Of course, when we shoot, if we're shooting, we can only shoot in 4:3 aspect ratio. We can always bring that into cropping software in Camera Raw, in Photoshop, and crop those images to the perfect aspect ratio that we want to fit our composition. So we'll be back with more composition, help you take better photos.